There's a special kind of American optimism where someone will hear, "Our neighborhood has had 3 shootings, from car break-ins to stores closed, and the police department is short hundreds of officers," and they'll say, "Yeah, but have you tried brunch?" That is basically urban policy now. Brunch, murals, luxury apartments with a dog spa, and then a CVS where the deodorant is locked up like it knows state secrets. But here's the twist. The crime story in America right now is not as simple as cable news wants it to be. Nationally, a lot of major crime categories actually fell in 2025. The Council on Criminal Justice found that in its sample of 40 large cities, 11 of 13 major offenses were lower in 2025 than in 2024, with homicide down 21% and motor vehicle theft down 27%. So no, this is not a cartoon where every city is on fire and the raccoons have formed a police union. But that also does not mean people are imagining the problem, because crime is not just a spreadsheet. Crime is your kid's school going into lockdown. Crime is your catalytic converter leaving your car before you do. Crime is the grocery store closing early, the pharmacy installing plexiglass like it's a Cold War embassy, and your landlord explaining that rent is going up because insurance, security, and repairs have all decided to cosplay as inflation. And that's what we're talking about today. 14 American cities where crime, disorder, fear, or the cost of staying put has hit the kind of level where normal families start having the forbidden Zillow conversation. You know the one. Maybe we should just look. Nobody is saying every single person is fleeing in a covered wagon. Nobody is saying these cities are doomed. Some of them are improving fast. Some of them are genuinely beautiful places full of normal people just trying to live their lives. But when a city gets famous for smashed windows, violent weekends, police vacancies, retail closures, and insurance headaches, the reputation sticks like gum on a bus seat. And yes, we'll use data, but we'll also use common sense, which has been missing from public life since approximately 2016. The weird thing about crime in America right now is that the national trend and the neighborhood feeling can both be true at the same time. A city can have fewer homicides than last year and still feel unsafe in certain neighborhoods. A downtown can report lower robbery numbers and still have office workers refusing to come back after 5 p.m. A police chief can announce a historic decline in violence while business owners are still replacing glass so often they should be buying it wholesale. This is why people argue about crime like they're speaking different languages. One person is talking about annual citywide statistics. Another person is talking about the gas station where nobody uses the far pump after dark. One person is saying, actually, violent crime is down 17%. Another person is saying, cool, my neighbor's Kia has been stolen twice, and now he drives a 2008 Corolla with religious conviction. Retail is also part of this. In 2025, the National Retail Federation reported that retailers saw an 18% increase in average shoplifting incidents in 2024 versus 2023, and threats or acts of violence during theft events increased 17%. Also, 64% of surveyed retailers said they reported less than half of store-related theft incidents to law enforcement, with lack of response listed as the main reason. That's not a conspiracy. That is basically the retail industry saying, we have created a parallel legal system called Just Let It Go. Then there's police staffing. Mayors and departments across the country have been scrambling to rebuild forces after retirements, resignations, recruitment problems, budget fights, and general public exhaustion. A 2025 U.S. Conference of Mayors survey framed violent crime as improving in many places, but still a major challenge, while cities kept asking for federal support, staffing help, and resources. And then insurance shows up, wearing a tiny villain cape. High property crime, theft, vandalism, and claims history can affect homeowners and commercial insurance pricing by zip code, which means crime is not just a safety issue. It becomes a monthly bill. MoneyGeek notes that higher theft, vandalism, and property crime rates in urban areas can drive up home insurance costs because insurers price around expected claims. So when people say families are evacuating, that can sound dramatic. And yes, it is dramatic. It's YouTube. We're not here to whisper into a beige cardigan. But the real version is slower and sadder. Families leave when the math stops making sense, when the schools feel unstable, when car insurance is absurd, when the nearest Target closes, when grandma says she doesn't like walking to the corner anymore. So let's count them down. Number 14. Oakland, California. Oakland is what happens when a city has incredible weather, legendary culture, amazing food, and somehow still makes you check whether your car windows survived dinner. Oakland is not boring. Oakland has soul. Oakland has history. Oakland is neighborhoods people love with a loyalty usually reserved for football teams and doomed relatives. But Oakland also became one of the poster children for the modern urban crime panic, especially after high-profile robberies, car break-ins, retail problems, and businesses deciding that operating there required the emotional stamina of a hostage negotiator. Here is the important fact, though: Oakland's recent data has improved. Police said violent crime dropped 29% in the first half of 2025, compared with the same period in 2024. And later reporting said Oakland finished 2025 with 67 homicides, the lowest annual total in decades, and down 22% from 2024. That is real progress. But here's the problem with crime reputation. It has the healing speed of a Comcast customer service ticket. For years, Oakland residents dealt with car break-ins, armed robberies, sideshows, store closures, and a police department that often seemed underwater. Even when the numbers improve, people do not instantly forget the era when leaving a backpack in your car was treated like putting chum in shark water. The lifestyle observation is this: Oakland is still one of the Bay Area's most interesting cities. You can eat better there than in places charging twice the rent for half the personality. But the trade-off is that daily life can feel like you need a strategy for things other cities barely think about. Where do I park? Can I leave this visible? Is this block okay at night? Why does this Walgreens have the vibe of a military checkpoint? Oakland may be getting safer on paper, but it is still living with the emotional hangover of chaos. And emotional hangovers are the most Oakland thing possible, right after paying $19 for a sandwich next to a boarded-up storefront. Number 13. Albuquerque, New Mexico. Albuquerque is one of those cities where outsiders arrive expecting turquoise jewelry, red chili, sunsets, desert mysticism, maybe a little Breaking Bad tourism, because apparently Americans cannot visit a place unless television gave them permission. And then they learn that Albuquerque has a crime problem with layers, like lasagna, but made of stolen trucks and unresolved policy meetings. Now again, the recent numbers are not simply everything is exploding. Albuquerque police reported that 2025 preliminary year-end crime numbers showed overall crime dropping, with violent crime down 13% compared with the previous year and down 26% over 8 years. Motor vehicle theft also reportedly fell sharply in 2025, including a 40% drop in one January to September comparison. So why is Albuquerque on this list? Because the baseline has been rough enough that even improvement still leaves people exhausted. New Mexico has had serious issues with auto theft, violence, addiction, property crime, and repeat offenders. Albuquerque is not some sleepy desert postcard. It is a real metro with real problems, and a lot of residents feel like they've been told good news. Crime is down while still stepping over the daily evidence that civilization has software bugs. The lifestyle is strange because Albuquerque can be genuinely affordable. Compared with much of the West, you get mountain views, great food, and a culture that does not feel copy-pasted from a real estate brochure. But the downside is that some families do the same calculation over and over. Cheaper housing, but higher anxiety. Lower rent, but more security cameras. Beautiful skies. But you are still asking if your car will be there tomorrow. Albuquerque is the kind of place where people will defend it passionately, then immediately tell you not to stop at that one gas station after midnight. That is local love. Very specific, mildly terrifying local love. Number 12. Little Rock, Arkansas. Little Rock is the name of a children's book town and the crime discourse of a city council meeting. That never ends. Outsiders hear Little Rock and imagine a manageable southern capital, Some state buildings, some barbecue, maybe a nice riverfront. Maybe a guy named Dale explaining property taxes at a diner. And yes, Little Rock has plenty of that, but it has also carried a reputation for violence that feels way bigger than its size. The recent numbers are mixed in the way crime numbers often are. Local reporting in early 2026 said violent crime in Little Rock was trending down overall, but homicides saw a slight increase from 2024 to 2025. That is exactly the kind of split that makes public conversations insane. One person says, overall violence is down. Another says, more people were murdered. Then everybody yells until someone mentions parking. Little Rock's issue is not that every street is dangerous. That's lazy. The issue is concentration. Certain neighborhoods carry a much heavier burden, and that affects how people shop, where parents let kids play, and whether families decide to stay after one too many close calls. The cultural observation is that Little Rock still has a very livable scale. It is not some giant megacity where you need 3 apps and a spiritual guide to commute. But the downside is that in a smaller city, crime feels personal faster. The shooting is not somewhere across town. It is by the store, you know. The robbery is not abstract. It is near the school, the cousin's house, the church parking lot. Little Rock proves that crime does not need a huge skyline to change daily life. Sometimes all it needs is a few repeat hot spots and a community tired of pretending everything is fine because the rent is cheaper than Nashville. Number 11, Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis is one of America's greatest cultural cities and one of America's most professionally disrespected cities. This place gave the country music history, barbecue, civil rights history, and enough soul to power a small planet. And what does the national media give it back? A mugshot montage and a ranking. Memphis has been through a serious crime crisis. For years, it sat near the top of lists nobody wants to win. Violent crime, carjackings, homicides, and theft created a climate where people who love the city still talk about leaving it. But 2025 brought real improvement. Memphis police said year-end 2025 data showed significant reductions in violent crime. And local reporting said overall Part 1 crimes fell 27%, murders fell 26%, aggravated assaults dropped 22%, robberies fell 31%, and carjackings fell 48%. That is not small. That is the kind of decline a city should be proud of. But the reason Memphis stays in this conversation is the accumulated damage. Businesses do not immediately reopen because one year improved. Families do not instantly relax because a press conference had good charts. The lived reality takes longer to reset. The lifestyle observation is that Memphis can be affordable, soulful, and deeply rooted in ways that newer boomtowns only pretend to be. But the trade-off is the stress. Tax, people structure their lives around safety. They choose routes carefully. They debate school zones. They buy cameras. They tell relatives, text me when you get home, with just a little too much seriousness. Memphis is improving, but it is also trying to crawl out of a hole dug by years of violence. And crawling out of a hole is hard when half the country keeps shouting down into it. Have you tried being less Memphis? Number 10, St. Louis, Missouri. St. Louis has the cities living inside it. One is historic brick homes, parks, museums, baseball, toasted ravioli, and neighborhoods that look like they should be in an indie movie about a guy restoring a piano. The other is a crime reputation so intense that every conversation about moving there becomes a seminar on census boundaries. And that matters because St. Louis crime stats are famously tricky. City limits, metro area, county separation, population loss, concentrated poverty, and neighborhood-level violence all make the numbers look different depending on how you slice them. America loves a ranking, but St. Louis is basically a warning label for ranking abuse. Recent data showed improvement. St. Louis police reported overall crime fell 16% in 2025 compared with 2024, and 28% compared with 2023, with homicides hitting a 12-year low. That is encouraging, but again, reputation sticks. The grounding reality is that St. Louis has had years where its homicide rate was among the highest for large U.S. cities. And even when things improve, Families remember the years when violence felt like background weather. Businesses remember break-ins. Residents remember the sound of gunfire becoming too familiar. That is not normal, even if people adapt to it, because humans will normalize anything, including $7 coffee and potholes that qualify as geological formations. The lifestyle observation is that St. Louis is still one of the most underrated cities in America for architecture, food, culture, and housing value. You can get a house there that would cost approximately one private island in coastal California. But the downside is unevenness. One neighborhood feels like a hidden gem. Another feels like the municipal government lost the save file. St. Louis is not a punchline. It is a complicated city with deep problems and real improvements, but it remains a place where families often ask the most Midwestern question possible: is this block okay, or is it St. Louis okay? Number 9. Baltimore, Maryland. Baltimore is beautiful in a way that makes you mad. The row houses, the harbor, the neighborhoods, the accents, the food, the history. It should be one of America's easiest cities to love. And then Baltimore does Baltimore things and makes the relationship complicated. Baltimore also had one of the most important crime improvements in the country. The city reported 133 homicides in 2025, down from 194 in 2024, and non-fatal shootings fell from 412 to 311. City officials described 2025 as a record low for homicides, with violence down dramatically from 2021. That is huge. Baltimore deserves credit for that. But Baltimore is on this list because better than the worst years is not the same as easy living. Many families and businesses still operate with deep caution. Some neighborhoods are improving, others remain painfully fragile. And when a city has carried violence for decades, one good trend line does not magically repair trust. The cultural observation is that Baltimore has a real personality, not a fake brand personality invented by a tourism board. A real one. It is funny, stubborn, proud, weird, gritty, and occasionally allergic to its own success. The downside is that dysfunction can feel baked into the operating system. Schools, policing, housing, drugs, vacancy, violence, tax base, all braided together like the world's worst friendship bracelet. Baltimore is not emptying out because everyone suddenly forgot the crab cakes are good. It loses some families because people get tired of fighting the same battle every year. At some point, you stop saying it's getting better and start saying I want my kid to sleep through the night. Number 8. New Orleans, Louisiana. New Orleans is America's greatest argument against efficiency. Nothing works exactly right, and somehow everyone still wants to go there. It is gorgeous, chaotic, musical, decaying, magical, corrupt in the old-timey theatrical sense, and culturally irreplaceable. New Orleans is the kind of city where a building can be collapsing, the street can be flooded, your car can be missing, and someone nearby is still playing trumpet like the apocalypse is good rhythm. Crime there has been serious. In 2022, New Orleans was widely discussed as one of the nation's highest murder rate cities. But by 2025, violent crime had fallen for a third straight year. AP reported that New Orleans had 121 murders in 2025, down from 266 in 2022, with reductions in shootings, armed robberies, and carjackings. That is a dramatic improvement. But New Orleans still faces an understaffed police force, public disorder, tourist zone pressure, neighborhood violence, and the general civic problem of trying to run a city that sometimes seems held together by music, duct tape, and vibes. The lifestyle observation is obvious. People do not leave New Orleans casually. Leaving New Orleans is like breaking up with a beautiful disaster. Who cooks better than your new spouse? But families do leave when they get tired of hurricanes, insurance, unreliable services, school concerns, and crime stress all forming a group chat called Move to Houston. The downside is that New Orleans is expensive in hidden ways. Maybe housing looks cheaper than Los Angeles, but insurance, repairs, car damage, weather risk, and security all pile up. The city makes you pay a chaos premium. New Orleans is not dying. It has survived things that would turn other cities into parking lots. But families do not need a city to die before they leave. They just need daily life to become too dramatic for people who are not being paid by Bravo. Number 7. Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland is one of those cities people joke about until they visit and realize, wait, this place has world-class institutions, interesting neighborhoods, lakefront potential, and houses that don't require selling a kidney on Facebook Marketplace. But Cleveland also has serious crime challenges, especially in neighborhoods that have carried decades of disinvestment, population loss, and violence. The city has had high rates of shootings, property crime, and auto theft in recent years. Even as 2025 brought improvement, city leaders reported that homicides dropped 16% in 2025, rape fell 28%, grand theft motor vehicle fell 26%, robberies declined 24%, felony assaults dropped 15%, and burglaries decreased 14%. Cleveland also saw a major recruiting boost, with cadet applications reportedly rising 356%. So why include Cleveland? Because the crime story is not just about whether 2025 improved. It is about how hard the city had to work to get there, and how uneven safety remains across neighborhoods. The lifestyle observation is that Cleveland can feel like a bargain with culture. Food, sports, music, museums, lake access, historic homes, all at prices that make coastal people blink like they've encountered a clerical error. But the downside is that neighborhood selection matters intensely. Not, oh, this area has better coffee. More like this area changes your entire risk profile. Cleveland is improving, but many families still make decisions based on schools, violence, and whether the neighborhood feels stable enough to invest in. A cheap house is not cheap if you spend the difference on repairs, security, insurance, and emotional support snacks. Number 6. Chicago, Illinois. Chicago is not one city. Chicago is a country with lake-effect weather. You can have world-class architecture, Michelin-star restaurants, quiet bungalow blocks, a stunning lakefront, and then 5 miles away a neighborhood dealing with violence that feels like a policy failure. Wearing work boots. Chicago is also the favorite city for people online who have never been there, but are absolutely certain it is either paradise or a war zone. Both groups need to go outside. The recent data is mixed. Much violent crime has declined in many large cities, but reporting in May 2026 noted Chicago homicides had risen slightly so far in 2026, with 150 homicides as of April, compared with 144 at the same point the prior year, even as other violent crimes like robberies and sexual assaults were down. That is the Chicago problem in miniature. Improvement in some categories, stubborn violence in others, and a political fight around every statistic like it's a family Thanksgiving where everyone brought a spreadsheet. The lifestyle observation is that Chicago still offers the best big city value in America if you choose well. Transit, food, jobs, culture, housing stock, lakefront, all at prices lower than the coastal nonsense zones. But the downside is extreme unevenness. Safety can change sharply by neighborhood, block, hour, and context. That makes family decisions complicated. People do not usually leave Chicago because Chicago. They leave a specific set of stresses, school decisions, carjackings, taxes, winter, safety concerns, and the creeping realization that their property tax bill has become a second mortgage with a mustache. Chicago is still magnificent, but it is also a city where every person has a map in their head, and half of that map is labeled "Don't be cute." Number 5. Portland, Oregon. Portland used to be America's quirky little coffee goblin. Bikes, books, bridges, weird donuts, rain jackets, and men who looked like they personally composted their emotions. Then the pandemic era hit, downtown struggled, disorder became more visible, businesses got tired, and Portland became a national symbol in arguments where everyone was annoying. Again, the latest data has improved. Portland police and local reporting said homicides fell 51% in the first half of 2025, and overall violent crime fell 17%, making Portland one of the cities with the strongest reported reductions among major agencies. But downtown recovery is not the same thing as a line graph. Portland's issue has been the collapse of public confidence. People saw open drug use, vandalism, theft, tents, boarded windows, and a downtown that felt less like a city center and more like a non-profit conference. After a raccoon attack, the lifestyle observation is that Portland remains extremely livable if you are in the right place and have the right expectations. It is green, creative, walkable in parts, and still culturally distinct. But the downside is that civic patience wore thin. People who used to defend every urban problem as just part of city life started quietly moving to suburbs and saying things like, "We just needed more space," which is American for "I'm tired of stepping around chaos." Portland is trying to recover, but it learned the hard way that coolness is not a public safety strategy. You cannot artisanal pickle your way out of disorder. Number 4. Seattle, Washington. Seattle is rich, beautiful, educated, and somehow still manages to make basic urban functioning feel like a group project where Amazon did the slideshow and the city forgot to bring chairs. Seattle's crime story is also not one note. Recent data showed improvement. Seattle police reported a significant drop in violent crime in 2025, including a 36% reduction in homicides, and early reporting showed broader crime declines across Seattle and King County. But Seattle has been dealing with a reputation problem built from years of visible disorder. Downtown retail struggles, car break-ins, transit concerns, and police staffing shortages. PRF noted that Seattle saw its first staffing increase since 2024. In early 2025, hiring improved significantly after contract changes and a streamlined process. That is good news, but it also tells you how deep the hole was. The lifestyle observation is that Seattle is still an economic powerhouse. Tech money, mountains, water, coffee, Asian food, ferries, dogs and raincoats. The whole premium package. But the downside is that people are paying luxury prices for a city that sometimes feels like it forgot to include the luxury. When your rent is $2,800 and the drugstore has everything behind glass, something in the social contract starts making dial-up modem noises. Seattle is not collapsing. It is too wealthy to collapse normally. It will just become increasingly inconvenient in ways that cost $37 each. Number 3. Minneapolis, Minnesota. Minneapolis is complicated because it became a national symbol after 2020, and national symbols are where nuance goes to be publicly executed. The city has beautiful lakes, strong institutions, great parks, a serious arts scene, and neighborhoods people love deeply. But after 2020, Minneapolis also faced spikes in violence, staffing crises, downtown anxiety, and a long public debate over policing that turned into a political blender with no lid. Recent numbers have improved. Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara said serious street crime declined in 2025, with 60 for homicides compared with 77 in 2024, even though the year still included several mass shootings. The problem is trust. When residents feel the public safety system is unstable, they do not wait for a perfect statistical trend. They make family decisions. They move to a suburb. They stop going downtown. They stop letting teenagers hang out in certain areas. They change habits quietly. The lifestyle observation is that Minneapolis is still one of America's best quality of life cities. When it works, lakes, trails, jobs, schools, arts, neighborhoods, all wrapped in Midwestern competence. But the downside is that the competence brand took a hit. People started asking whether the city could handle basic order without turning every decision into a national moral referendum. Minneapolis is improving, but the scar tissue is real. And nothing says urban recovery like a city trying to convince people downtown is fine while everyone keeps asking, fine like actually fine, or fine like a text from your ex. Number 2. Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is the only city in America where someone can steal your car and then a senator will blame it on zoning. The capital is rich, powerful, beautiful, and absurd. It has embassies, monuments, lawyers, lobbyists, brunch lines, and neighborhoods where a row house costs $1.2 million, but someone still stole the wheels off a Honda overnight. DC's crime story peaked politically after a rough 2023, then improved sharply. MPD data and local reporting showed violent crime down in 2025, including a 22% drop in violent crime during the first 5 months, and later reporting said the decline continued for a second straight year. But D.C. remains on this list because the surge scared people. Carjackings, robberies, juvenile crime concerns, metro anxiety, and political fights over policing all hit at once. For families, the question was not what does the annual table say, it was do I want my kid learning to drive here right now. The lifestyle observation is that D.C. is one of the most educated, job-rich metros in the country. It has museums you already paid for with taxes, so technically every Smithsonian visit is a tiny act of revenge. But the downside is cost. You pay world-class prices, and then if your neighborhood feels unsafe, the betrayal feels personal. D.C. is improving, but it shows how fast a city can lose its aura of control. The nation's capital cannot look like the GRU project is being guarded by a Ring camera and a vibes-based juvenile policy. Number 1. San Francisco, California. San Francisco is the final boss of American urban contradiction. It is one of the most beautiful cities on earth. The views are absurd. The architecture is iconic. The food is incredible. The economy is powerful. And yet for years, the national image became smashed car windows, drug scenes, retail closures, empty downtown offices, and people arguing over whether reality itself was conservative propaganda. Now here's the twist. San Francisco crime has also improved dramatically. In the first half of 2025, Chronicle Analysis reported violent crime fell 19% and property crime fell 25% compared with the same period in 2024. Motor vehicle theft dropped 45%. Homicides were also down during that period. But San Francisco is number 1 because reputation damage there became almost mythological. The city became the global example of how even extreme wealth does not automatically buy functional streets. The grounding price reference is brutal. This is a place where regular homes can still cost over $1 million, rents remain punishing, and businesses face high labor, lease, security, insurance, and operating costs. When crime and disorder hit a city that expensive, people do not say, well, that's urban life. They say, I am paying how much for this? The lifestyle observation is that San Francisco is still magic when it wants to be. Fog, hills, parks, neighborhoods, bakeries, transit, views that make you forgive bad decisions. But the downside is that the city trained residents to develop survival habits around theft and disorder. Leave nothing in the car. Watch where you step. Check store hours. Assume the pharmacy aisle is locked. Pretend this is normal because otherwise you have to admit the richest region in America invented premium dysfunction. And yes, crime is down. That matters. But when a city's reputation becomes beautiful, expensive, and weirdly exhausting, families and businesses start leaving not because it is unlivable, but because the value proposition got mugged in broad daylight. Ending. So what do we do with this list? The lazy version is to say, these cities are doomed. They are not. The equally lazy version is to say, crime is down, so stop complaining. Also no. The real answer is more annoying, which means it is probably closer to true. A lot of American cities are safer in 2025 than they were during the worst pandemic-era spikes. Homicides, robberies, carjackings, and vehicle thefts fell in many major cities. That is good. That matters. That means some strategies may be working, and it means the apocalyptic narrative is often outdated. But crime is not only homicide. Safety is not only a rate per 100,000. A city can improve and still feel unstable. A downtown can be safer than last year and still not feel worth the commute. A family can love a city and still decide they are done paying high rent. To live with locked toothpaste, stolen cars, school lockdowns, and a police department that sounds like it is held together with overtime and caffeine. The deeper issue is trust. Trust that if you call 911, someone comes. Trust that if a store opens, it can survive. Trust that if a kid walks home, the route is okay. Trust that if a city says things are improving, the improvement will show up in daily life, not just in a PDF. That is what families are really evacuating from. Not always crime itself, but the feeling that the grown-ups lost control and then handed everyone a dashboard. So here's the question for the comments. If a city's crime numbers improve, but residents still feel unsafe, who gets the final say? The data or the people living inside it? Be civil, or don't. This is YouTube, not a monastery. And if you live in one of these cities, tell us what the statistics miss, because there's always something the spreadsheet forgot to mention. Like the guy stealing Tide Pods at 9:14 a.m. while making direct eye contact with capitalism.